Marcus Osborne, in the early hours of the morning of the 15th of May 2023, you stabbed to death your former partner, Katie Hickton, in the front hall of the house that you used to share with her at 92 Harpay Inge in Huddersfield. You then used Katie's mobile phone to lure her friend Steven Harnet to the house. When he arrived, you stabbed him to death also. Whilst you committed these murders, 4 children were upstairs in bed. Another female, who I will refer to in these sentencing remarks as V, was also present in the house, having been held captive by you at knifepoint, awaiting Katie's return. After killing Katie and Steven, you went back upstairs with your knife to make sure that V did not raise the alarm. Later that morning at daybreak, you raped V at knifepoint. This short summary does not begin to convey the full horror of what took place in the house at Harpay Inge that night. These were brutal stabbings. You stabbed Katie 99 times with a large knife you had taken from the kitchen. Her injuries included multiple disfiguring stab wounds to her face. You stabbed Steven 24 times, and throughout all of this activity, you kept V captive and in fear for her life. She describes you washing yourself between killings, laughing and jeering at what you'd done as you scrolled through Katie's social media accounts and played voice messages from her phone between her and Steven. You told her you would slice her throat if she did not comply with your demand that she got undressed before you raped her, telling her that it was going to be the last time that you had sex in a long time. Shortly before 9 a.m, you asked a neighbour to come to the house to have a look. You showed her the 2 bodies. It was, the neighbour said, as though you were proud of what you had done. Katie Hickton was 27 years old when she died. I have heard powerful evidence from her father and from her mother of their loss. She was much loved by them and by her wider family, which has been shaken to its very core by her death and its horrific circumstances. She's described as having been a kind and compassionate woman, a close friend to her mother, and the apple of her father's eye. Steven Harnet was 25 years old when he died. His mother tells me how her world has come crashing down since his death, and how she remains haunted by the knowledge of what happened to him. He was clearly a very loving son and a very loving father to the young child whom he has left behind. On the 15th of May of 2023, you pleaded guilty to the murder of Katie Hickton and the murder of Steven Harnet. You pleaded guilty to the false imprisonment of V and to her rape. I must now sentence you for these offences, and I do so on the basis of the facts of which I am certain, having read the material available to me and having heard submissions on behalf of the Crown by Mr Sanderford, King's Counsel, and on your behalf by Mr Elvidge, King's Counsel. And I start by dealing with the facts. You were in a relationship with Katie Hickton for around 5 years. Shortly before Katie died, she gave a witness statement to the police on the 11th of May 2023, in which she described the relationship. The relationship had been good to start off with, but around 2 years in, you started to become verbally abusive towards her. You began controlling what she wore and what she did. If things were not done exactly as you wished, you would become verbally abusive, and that verbal abuse quickly turned into physical abuse. The physical abuse became more frequent and less predictable over time. But the last straw was your assault on Katie on the 28th of April 2023. Following an altercation, you hit her around the head, you pushed her to the ground and kicked her about the ribs. The physical attack continued upstairs, where you punched her about the head and face. Katie spent the next few days in bed, unable to move. But by the 2nd of May, Katie was well enough physically to leave the house, and she moved out and lived with a relative until the 12th of May. Katie changed her Facebook status to single, she declined a large number of messages and phone calls from you. On the 10th of May, you exchanged Snapchat messages with Katie in which she told you she did not wish to see you. You responded with the message that if you found out that she was even messaging anyone else, I will end you fully. At 1:15 on the 10th of May, Katie went to the police station in Huddersfield to make a complaint about you, and an arrangement was made that she would be visited by a police officer at 8 a.m. the following morning. Later, on the 10th of May, she called the police to tell them that you had been in contact with her again and had threatened to slit the throats of her and her children. When she was seen the following morning at 8 a.m, she told the officer that whilst she did not believe that you would hurt the children, she did believe that if she did not go back to you, you would seek her out and seriously hurt or kill her. In her statement, she recorded this: "He has said that if I ever get another boyfriend, he will kill us both." On the 12th of May, you were arrested and interviewed on suspicion of domestic violence and coercive and controlling behaviour. You were released on bail with conditions not to attend the house at Harper Inge. Over the course of the next 2 days, you kept watch on the house in Harper Inge. You used one of your neighbours to find out whether Katie was in or out. On the 14th of May, you were in the street watching the house or spending time with neighbours. During the evening, you were spotted hanging around the street, looking towards Katie's house. At 9:30, Katie left the house by taxi to go to the cinema with Steven Harnet. Shortly after midnight, you took a taxi from your home in Rawthorpe Lane, and from there you made your way to Harpay Inge. At some point after midnight, V became aware of a figure at the door of the bedroom in which she was lying. She saw the outline of a knife. Straight away she knew that it was you. She challenged you and told you to get out. You struck her with such force that she fell onto the wardrobe, hitting her head and knocking her unconscious. When she regained consciousness, you were pacing the room. V's mobile telephone rang. It was Katie. You held a knife to V's neck, insisting that she tell Katie to come home. After the call, you took her phone so that V was unable to summon help. When Katie arrived, you ran downstairs armed with the knife. V heard Katie tell you to get out of the house, but you had already started stabbing her before she'd even got through the front door. You inflicted 99 single or groups of knife injuries. Many of those stab wounds were to the chest, penetrating the lungs on both sides. Other internal organs were injured, including the spleen and kidneys. You stabbed her buttocks, and there were 26 incisions to Katie's face. You used substantial force. One stab wound cut through the 11th rib, and another cut into the breastbone. This was a merciless and sustained attack on a woman who was completely defenceless. And I accept the Crown's submission that some of the injuries which you inflicted on Katie were intended to disfigure her as well as kill her. Some of this attack was witnessed by V from the top of the stairs. She saw you holding Katie with one hand and with the other stabbing her. She heard you say to Katie, "Do you think you're funny? I warned you I was going to kill you. You are a slag. This is your fault that this is happening." As V shouted to you to stop and made to come down the stairs, you told her to shut up or she would be next. The last time V saw her, Katie was on the floor in the hallway saying that she could not breathe. When you came upstairs, you said to V, "She is going to die on her own, the bitch. Stee's next." V pleaded with you to be allowed to go downstairs to be with Katie, but you said to her that she is going to die on her own, and you are going to sit up here knowing that the bitch is going to die on her own. You washed your hands and changed your clothes. You told V that you were going to kill Steven Harnet because you knew that something had been going on between Steven and Katie. So, using Katie's mobile phone, you then lured Steven to the house, sending messages purporting to be from Katie. You even used Katie's taxi app to book a taxi to bring Steven over. You sent a message to Steven purporting to be from Katie, telling him to come in through the side door into the kitchen. Upon entering the kitchen, you attacked Steven with the kitchen knife. You inflicted 24 injuries, 13 stab wounds, 6 incised wounds, 5 superficial knife tip injuries. The most significant of the injuries was the stab wound to the right side of the chest, penetrating the lung and causing a large wound in the aorta. This was a lethal injury, and death would have followed very shortly after it was inflicted. After killing Steven, you returned upstairs. You told V that Steven's death had been quick and easy, and that's him dead. You likened Katie and Steven to Romeo and Juliet. You said that Katie had put up a better fight than Steven. You told V that you'd done what you set out to do, and that the bitch would not be doing this again. You appeared calm and were laughing as you listened to the voice notes exchanged between Steven and Katie on her mobile phone. At some point you went downstairs and moved the bodies into the living room. When the paramedics arrived, they found that Katie's body had been stripped naked, save for her underwear, which had been pulled up so as to expose her genitalia. Her body was arranged in what was described by the paramedic as a starfish position, legs apart and arms away from the body. Steven's body was by her side. He was also placed on his back in a starfish position. And it appeared to the paramedic that both bodies had been cleaned to a certain extent. V remained in the bedroom, petrified that she would be next in line for your murderous assault. V is not sure what time you came back into the bedroom and raped her. She remembers only that the birds had started to sing. You came in wearing your shorts and you started to attack her. She was told to shut up or her throat would be slashed. You said, "This is happening. I will slice your throat if you scream. This is the last time that I will have sex in a long time." You raped her to the point of ejaculation. The incident lasted about 5 minutes. It was rough and very painful for V. The knife remained by your side on the bed throughout. After the rape, you ran V a bath, but she refused. You took the bath yourself. V remained in the house, unable to get away, through fear of her own safety and of the children. You made contact with a neighbour, and you suggested that she came round and have a look. When you opened the door, the neighbour saw the blood in the hallway. You showed off the bodies in the living room as if, said the neighbour, you were proud of what you'd done. You told them that you had done it, and that you knew that you were going down for murder, but you needed to sort some stuff out. When you heard the sound of the police arriving at the house, you ran away, later turning yourself into the police station, where you were interviewed under caution but made no reply. A forensic examination of swabs taken from Katie's body at the post-mortem examination was undertaken. The sentence for murder is fixed by law, and it is one of life imprisonment. That is the sentence which I impose. But I must determine in this case whether I should impose a whole life order, as submitted by the Crown, or whether I should impose a minimum term as submitted on your behalf. By whole life order, I mean that you will remain in prison for the remainder of your life. By minimum term, I refer to a minimum term which you must serve in prison before consideration is given to your release by the Parole Board. Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020 sets out at Section 2 that if the court considers the seriousness of the offence, or the combination of the offence and offences associated with it to be exceptionally high, then the appropriate starting point for sentence is a whole life order. Paragraph 2A provides that when an offender murders two people and any of the three criteria identified is satisfied in respect of both murders, then a whole life order would be the normal starting point. One of those criteria is when both murders involve sexual or sadistic conduct. Schedule 21 also sets out that if the court considers that the case does not fall within the category of exceptional seriousness, but that the seriousness of the offence or the combination of the offence and one or more offences associated with it is particularly high, then the appropriate starting point in determining the minimum term is 30 years imprisonment. Cases that would normally fit within this category include a murder of two or more persons or a single murder involving sexual or sadistic conduct. The Crown submits that both murders involved sexual conduct. It submits that the seriousness of these murders is exceptionally high. In these circumstances, the normal starting point for murders of exceptionally high seriousness should apply, that is, a whole life term. Mr Elvidge, on your behalf, submits that neither killing was sexually motivated and neither involved sexual conduct. He submits that the starting point should be a minimum term of 30 years custody, although he concedes that this term may well be substantially increased to reflect aggravating factors. In determining the appropriate starting point, I first consider whether either or both of the murders involved sexual conduct. In the case The Crown and Walker, the court said at paragraph 26 that the phrase was intended to cover circumstances where the acts which resulted in the death were sexual in nature or accompanied by sexual activity that increased the ordeal of the victim or the depravity of the murder, or both. But as Lady Justice Hallett remarked in The Crown and Nelson, it would be wrong to elevate that statement into an all-encompassing definition of what constitutes a murder involving sexual activity. She emphasised that each case would turn on its own facts. She underscored the importance of considering the evidence as a whole. Mr Elvidge endorses that approach and submits that conduct embraces all of the activities that occur. And in this context, I make the following findings. First, the motivation for both killings was sexual in nature. Both murders were driven by your sexual jealousy arising from Katie's decision to start a new relationship with Steven. I do not accept that the murders are explained by your entrenched insecurity about being abandoned or rejected as a result of a neglected childhood, as Mr Elvidge submits. You killed Katie and Steven because you believed that they had started seeing each other and that their relationship was an intimate one. This conclusion is fully borne out by the text messages between you and Katie, including your threat to her on the 10th of May, that if she as much as even messaged someone else, you would end her fully. She reported to the police that you had warned her that if she ever got another boyfriend, you would kill them both. You told her that she should delete Steven from her social media, or you would fuck him up. Even as you were killing her, you told Katie, I warned you I was going to kill you. Who have you been with? You're a slag. I warned you, this is your fault, this is happening. After you killed Steven, you told V, Romeo and Juliet, told V that you'd done what you set out to do and that the bitch won't be doing this again. These statements do not suggest that you were enraged just because Katie had finally left you, although no doubt that was part of the explanation. Your primary reason for killing them both was because Katie had started a sexual relationship with another man, and you were pathologically jealous of that relationship. Second, both of these murders involved overtly sexual acts by you. You mutilated Stephen's body by cutting off his penis to emasculate him. I am sure you also engaged in sexual activity with Katie when she was dead or dying. It is clear that by the 7th of May, Katie had already started a relationship with Stephen. Their social media messages are warm and intimate and continued to be so until the evening before their murders. Their sexual interest in each other is apparent. Whilst the text messages reveal her developing relationship with Stephen, they also reveal her hostility towards you and her determination to end her relationship with you. She declined to accept a very large number of calls from you. Such dialogue as there was between you both was insulting. On the 8th of May, she expressed her frustration to Stephen that even though she'd separated from you, you were still trying to control what she did. On the 10th of May, Katie sent a message telling you to leave her alone and that she didn't want to see you again after all of the abuse. She accused you of being a freak. By the 10th of May, of course, she had already gone to the police in order to report your abuse and your threats. In the context of the growing relationship between Katie and Stephen, and Katie's very obvious hostility towards you, it is to my mind inconceivable that consensual sexual intercourse took place between you both between the 7th and the 14th of May. Katie wanted nothing to do with you. Furthermore, there's no mention in the social media dialogue of your having had sex together, and I'm sure that had you done so, one of you would have mentioned it. Likewise, if you'd raped her, then I have no doubt that this would have featured in her messaging with family or in her report to the police. I am sure, therefore, that the presence of your DNA was because you had intercourse with Katie as she lay dead or dying, or that you penetrated her body with something, resulting in semen being deposited inside her vagina. Your sexual abuse of Katie's body is consistent with your conduct generally that night. Everything that you did was motivated by sex and your need to degrade and sexually humiliate. You raped V at knife point in an ordeal lasting several minutes and during which you ejaculated. Your sexual abuse of Katie's body is part of that conduct. Given all that you did that night, it would be, if anything, surprising if you had not defiled her body in that way. These murders, in my judgment, undoubtedly involved sexual conduct. The test that I must apply is a broad one, and I must take into account all of the evidence. I regard it as wholly artificial in this case to seek to make distinctions based upon the precise timing of particular sexual acts, when the whole course of your conduct, which you engaged in that night, was motivated by sexual preoccupations and has a number of individual sexual acts at its core. To seek to judge the gravity of Katie's murder by reference to the time interval between death and sexual conduct would defy common sense and justice. It follows from these conclusions that the murders of Katie and Stephen would normally be considered to be of exceptionally high seriousness and attract a starting point of a whole life order before consideration is given to aggravating and mitigating factors. Mr. Elvidge emphasises, however, that it does not follow inevitably from a finding that the murders involved sexual conduct that the starting point is a whole life term. The statute sets out only that this would be the normal consequence. In accordance with the relevant sentencing guidelines, I take into account your guilty plea at this stage. I also take into account the other offences of which you are convicted. Paragraph 2 of Schedule 21 requires me to consider whether the murders and other associated offences, in combination, are of exceptional seriousness. I acknowledge that your guilty pleas to all offences at an early stage is a mitigating factor. Katie and Stephen's families will have known that they were to avoid the ordeal of a trial. By your guilty pleas, you've accepted what you've done and have accepted responsibility for your crimes. Mr Elvidge submits that the sentencing guidelines, reduction in sentence for a guilty plea, sets out the strong policy reasons why a guilty plea amounts to mitigation. I accept this, of course. However, throughout that night, you knew that your actions would lead to your incarceration. There was no element of subterfuge about your offending. As you said to her, you raped V because you knew it would be the last time you would have sex for a long time. You were proud of what you'd done and what you were doing. Your jeering comments to V, your messages to the neighbour telling her that Katie and Stephen should R.I.P., and your display of the bodies all demonstrate that you were proud of what you'd done and that you were obtaining gratification from telling others what you'd done. I see your guilty pleas in this light. I accept that your guilty pleas amount to mitigation, and I take them into account, but I'm not persuaded that those pleas should lead me to impose a minimum term rather than a whole life order. Your false imprisonment of V and her rape were very serious offences, justifying a substantial custodial sentence in their own right. Mr Elvidge submits that the rape falls at least into harm category 2 of the relevant sentencing guidelines and culpability B, with a starting point of 8 years imprisonment and a sentencing range of 7 to 9 years. However, 3 of the category 2 factors are present. This was a prolonged detention in which threats of violence at knife point were made. Whilst it's difficult to isolate the impact of the rape upon V from the impact upon her of witnessing the murder of Katie, in my judgment, the rape falls into category 1 harm. There are a number of serious aggravating factors. Assuming the imposition of a concurrent sentence for the false imprisonment, the rape would attract a sentence in the order of at least 15 years custody before reduction for a guilty plea. You are entitled, of course, to a reduction of 1/3 for your guilty pleas to rape and false imprisonment. I must also take into account any aggravating and mitigating factors. There are no mitigating factors in your case, other than your guilty plea, which I have already addressed. There is no psychiatric or other evidence which has been placed before me to explain or help me understand your actions. There are, however, numerous aggravating factors which I now set out in summary form. You have a substantial criminal record. You're now 35 years of age. You have 12 previous convictions for 27 offences. In March 2008, you were sentenced to a term of detention of 7 years for drug-related offences, for robbery and attempted robbery. In 2011, you were sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 16 weeks for common assault against your former female partner, towards whom you had behaved in a violent and controlling way. In January 2013, you were sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 54 months for causing grievous bodily harm with intent. The victim was your then female partner whom you assaulted, apparently because she was texting people on her phone. You punched her to the ground. You repeatedly kicked her in the head, bounced her head off the wall. You grabbed her around the throat and squeezed her until she thought she was going to pass out. Later, when she confirmed to you that the relationship was over, you attacked her again, pulling her across the room by her hair and slamming her head against the wall. You inflicted upon her serious injuries. Other aggravating factors include that these offences were committed whilst on police bail, following Katie having reported you to the police on the 10th of May. They involved a degree of planning and preparation, and your previous behaviour towards Katie is rightly accepted by Mr Elvidge to be an aggravating factor. As for the mental and physical suffering which you inflicted, I do not need to dwell upon the suffering which you caused Katie, nor the mental and physical suffering which you inflicted upon Stephen. I do, however, need to dwell upon the anguish which you caused V. This started from the moment that she saw your shadowy figure at the bedroom door holding a knife. You forced her to encourage Katie home, fearing your murderous intent. You deprived her of the chance to be with Katie as she lay dying downstairs. You taunted her, and of course, you brutally raped her. Perhaps worst of all, you made her put her own safety and that of the 4 children who were in the house in the balance against the safety of Katie. The anguish which you have caused her, and with which she still lives, is unimaginable. Taking the case as a whole, therefore, I am wholly satisfied that the appropriate and just disposal in this case is the imposition of a whole life order for each of the murders which you committed. I reach this conclusion, fully aware that such a disposal is a rare one and reserved for only the most extreme cases. I have taken into account your guilty pleas to all offences, your unsettled childhood, and all that has been said on your behalf by Mr Elvidge. But I do not consider that this is a borderline case. I am in no doubt. This is a case of such exceptional seriousness that even a very long minimum term would not amount to just punishment. What you did that night was horrific. Marcus Osborne, stand up. For the murder of Katie Hickton, Marcus Osborne, the sentence of the court is one of life imprisonment. I impose a whole life order. For the murder of Steven Harnet, the sentence of the court is one of life imprisonment. I impose a whole life order. For the associated offences of the rape of V and for her false imprisonment, I impose sentences of 10 years on each, both to run concurrently and obviously concurrent to the whole life orders which I have made, and I impose a sexual offender notification requirement. The victim's surcharge will apply. Please take the defendant down.